Okay, we are live. Thank you. Get that notice board down. Okay, committee, we're going to get started. This is Senate Finance. This is Thursday. Oh, and I just lost my agenda. This is January 27th, and we're going to start out today with Senator Westman. And I will find my agenda on the other screen, but Rich is here to talk to us about a problem with some appraisals and court orders that have been going down. This is our first walkthrough. We've been trying to reach the Listers Association, and so far we haven't gotten them, so we will have more witnesses on this one next week. But Senator, why don't you tell me or us what the problem is we're trying to address here?
So this is Rich Westman, Senator from Lamoille. S 214 deals with and I might say the first thing on your Finance Committee website on today's agenda under me, if you go to the Finance Committee website, you can it's pretty clear what the problem is. There's a spreadsheet, and I presented the spreadsheet from Smuggler's Notch Resort, and this sheet was given to me by the listers in Cambridge, and they're paid the contract help that helps them with the commercial listings within the town, and this is not a problem just at Smugs. This is a problem with every place across the state that has timeshare units. The timeshare business has really, in many respects, fallen apart. And so what you see at Smugs is
Richie, you've got, I don't know if it's the sun or a very bright light. Okay, if you move, you block it.
Let me see if I can.
There, it's the sun. Okay.
Well,
it felt like an interrogation there for a while.
It's the first time I've heard anybody in months complain about the sun.
I was just blocking the vision, not the sun itself.
So if you go to the spreadsheet that you will see, it lists all the condominium units at Smuggler's Notch Resort. And this was, as I said, given to me by the listers in Cambridge. And it lists, it first off lists all their spam numbers, it lists the condominiums, then it lists their values in 2018. The next column in this is their present listing, and shows you, and next to the last column is the drop in value. The value of the timeshare condominiums at Smuggler's Notch Resort was $102 million in 2018. That value has now dropped to 48, between 48 and $49 million, a $53 million drop in the valuation of those condominium units. And this, what highlights this is particularly that if you have a wholly owned condominium, there are wholly owned condominiums that their value is 3, 4, and 5 times the value of these timeshare units now.
Are these all timeshare units on the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay.
These are just the timeshare units on the spreadsheet. And what you see is a $53.3 million drop in their value since 2018. And so the way we appraise timeshare units is based upon the way they're sold. So, for example, at Smuggler's Notch Resort, they sell timeshare units in 26 blocks every 2 weeks. And the interesting thing that's behind that is they are now managed, the real estate business at Smuggler's Notch Resort is managed by Wyndham, the resort giant, and they sell point systems. So in many cases, they're buying up the timeshare weeks because the building is still officially a timeshare building. They're working to buy wholly owned buildings and leave in a timeshare, and then they turn around and sell Wyndham points and remarket the condominium. In one particular case that I saw in this, they had 2-bedroom unit, timeshare unit appraised at 66,000. The exact same unit that was a wholly owned unit was appraised at 325,000. And so that brings concern to me about what the equity is between this. Tom Vickery, who has been the paid appraiser for many of the communities around, and I think many of you on the committee will know him quite well, including Senator Cummings, because he longtime resident of Waterbury, or at least was. And so
He's head of the Listers Association.
He's been head of the Listers Association.
Yeah.
And so they approached me because this problem is going on now in Stratton, it's going on in Killington, it's going on at Mount Snow, it's going on in Stowe, it's going up and down all of those communities that have old timeshares. And the question really is, from his point of view and from the Listers Association, is how are they supposed to appraise these properties now? Now, for Cambridge, they got to the point in December that they had the grand list. And what you see for the sheet, they would have appealed. But the problem for Cambridge was, and it's a problem for any community, is because you have to lodge your grand list by a date certain, they didn't dare appeal, because if they appealed and the decision went against them because they had to meet the date of a time certain, any penalty in the drop of assessed value, so in this case, 53 million, the town of Cambridge would have been liable to the Ed Fund to come up with that amount. So they said that what the least line of resistance for the town of Cambridge was to file the grand list and not to appeal this. So that is a glitch in the process that I think needs looking at. This bill basically in the end, at the very last of it, what it basically says is that the fair market value of a timeshare project shall be appraised in a manner determined by the town, the value of comparable real property that does not contain timeshares. So it would mean that the timeshare unit would be appraised in the same manner as a wholly owned unit. And systematically, this now is beginning to happen, not only across Vermont, but across the country. And I think you would hear from Tom Vickery and people from the Listers Association. They've been looking at what's going on in Colorado, Florida, and a number of other states around this issue. But, and that's my story. And if you have questions, I'm happy.
Richard, can you give us, you gave me a little more background when this bill came in. How did all these values come to drop?
Well, they got appealed, and the town lost an appeal. And so they were forced to do the reassess.
Okay, who appealed it?
Originally, there is there a number of the timeshare associations and the condominium associations around the state have hired a lawyer, and that lawyer is representing them. and took them as a group in to do the appeal. And as I understand it, the same lawyer is bringing cases, has brought cases in Stratton and a number of places around the state. And so they reappraise based upon the appeal. There are many of these timeshare owners that still feel that in Cambridge's spot, as I can speak to that the best, that the assessed value is still too high given the drop in condominium values, and they would like this dropped another, from what I understand from the listers in my hometown, another 15 million.
Okay, Richie, just see if I've got this straight. You've got two arguably identical units next
Yep.
to each other. One is owned by me.
Yep.
The one next door, identical to mine, same square footage, same quality of bathroom, kitchen, the whole deal.
Yep.
Is owned by whom? By an, is it owned by Smuggler's Notch and then timeshares? Who owns the physical building? Or is that?
It's owned in, the timeshare building is owned in 26 different the timeshares.
I buy a timeshare. I buy 2 weeks in December or 2 weeks in July.
Yep.
And
you own those 2 weeks.
I own those 2 weeks. Who owns the building? I own it for 2 weeks.
You own it for 2 weeks.
And I have insurance on it for 2 weeks.
You have a management company, in this case at Smuggler's Notch Resort. Wyndham is the management company, and Wyndham oversees and
okay, but Wyndham always the management company?
No, it used to be Smuggler's Notch Resort. It was the management company.
Okay, so
Smuggler's Notch Resort still owns the management company, but they lease it out to Wyndham now.
Okay, so pick a date. Timeshares were the thing for a while, maybe the 80s, 90s. And you could, for a lot less than you could buy a condo. And I mean, I'm only going to ski 3 months, couple weeks of the year. So you buy your 2 weeks.
Yep.
And I assume that 2 weeks between Christmas and New Year's might cost more than 2 weeks in April.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. But I buy my 2 weeks. And over time, some of us have aged out and we aren't skiing anymore, or we found out it really wasn't worth it.
Yep.
I assume some of these have probably been rented out for those 2 weeks, probably a nice Airbnb deal. Okay. But it's the same building, and the
Yep.
appraisers have been appraising it according to the value of the building, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. And so they've been the same. Yeah. It sounds like now, in the meantime, the value of timeshares has deteriorated. People aren't buying them. The market value of a timeshare is much less than it was. All right. But
and part of that, if I might jump in, is because companies like Wyndham and now sell points. And
right. So that's the new market. So we've got a changing market. People are not buying timeshares. So we have a management.
What are points?
Yes.
Are points?
Points
What are points?
Okay, and we'll have to, all I know is there is a new marketing system because one of my children went on a freebie weekend. If you listen to our sales pitch, And for every time you stay there, you get points and you can stay at another one of their resorts for less money, and you build up points, and eventually you can stay somewhere for free. It's kind of like
And you buy,
Okay,
you stay at a Hampton Inn and
Okay.
you get a free night for every 10 nights you stay there or something. It's a similar kind of system. And that's
Okay.
the newest thing. So this building could, if the owners all got together and said, we want out, they could sell it as a condo,
yes,
right? It's zoned, it could be a condo. It hasn't been subdivided. There aren't,
or,
It's-
or in some of the cases in Smuggler's Notch Resort, some of the individual 2-week units have been sold to Wyndham. And so the Wyndham chain is buying them, and then they're selling points for people to stay. But if you buy points in Wyndham, it gives you the opportunity that you can stay anywhere in the Wyndham system. And I
right.
think it's literally in the hundreds, if not thousands, of different resorts that Wyndham runs around the country.
And I mean, but you could also, I am an owner, I could rent out those 2 weeks. Every year I could put it on Airbnb or what is it,
RCI.
yeah, all those online rental things, short-term rentals that we're having issues. But the issue for us is the valuation.
Yep.
Is because this new system, and we'll have Tom Vickery in. I
Yep.
understand he's done a lot of research that, and we just couldn't reach him today, not for lack of trying. So it's the valuation, because the condo next door is sold as a condo. This building could be sold as a condo. It's the same building, but it's used differently. Okay, so we're going to look at that. Senator Pearson.
just
Might-
to- Go ahead.
I might add that the other problem here was because the town had to file the grand list, it
Yeah.
cut off their ability to make an appeal to the tax department and appeal this. They might very well, if they had appealed, it never would have gone back to the 2018 level, but it might not have been where it is.
Okay,
But the town didn't want to take the chance of losing and then having to pay all the lost red fund.
all right, and or not having it settled and having to pay, and then having us have to pay them back. And this isn't a $10,000 issue. This is a $52 million issue, which is a lot of money for a small town.
The town of 3,800 people, it's a lot of money.
Yes. So Senator Pearson.
So, am I right, Senator Westman, that there's sort of two issues? There's the timing and the state's process, and
Yep.
then there's this tax fairness issue, and there's an intermingling. But for me, it's helpful to slice and dice a little bit. So, on the tax evaluation, Vermont's property tax considers sort of two options: it's residential or it's a commercial, right?
Mhm.
Is what's happened here that those units are no longer considered residential, they're considered commercial, and now the process to evaluate a business profitability or income has been maybe gamed in order to come up with a significantly reduced tax bill?
Well, I'm not sure I would use the term gamed.
Okay,
But
well,
what I would say is, these have always been second homes. These have always been commercial property. And so you have commercial property that is wholly owned, or you have commercial property that is timeshare. But
Or
what,
jointly owned.
yeah, but what they did was they go in and they do the assessed value for the wholly owned and say, what would a wholly owned sell for? And it would be, and in this case, what they did is they go in and say, what can you sell the 26 2-week periods for collectively, and came up with a value based on that, and not what the place
Okay.
is.
So
if it
for
was
one,
wholly-
they
And-
used
and
an
wait,
income value.
Yep.
well,
Yep.
s- I'm sorry, Madam Chair, you've broken my chain of thought here.
All
So, and is that why you keep bringing up the points? Because they didn't really attribute, they didn't put a dollar value on those points, or they put a reduced value on those?
No, the
Points?
points are the new system that people like to do.
Yeah,
They like to buy points from a Wyndham, from their
Yeah.
competitors. They buy points, and then they can go for a week or 2-week intervals anywhere they want within
Right.
the system. In this particular case, the management company who has the lease to manage now is Wyndham. They're buying up these
Okay.
2-week intervals.
oh.
And-
They're-
And then they're, and so
They're
structure,
leasing them.
so the structure looks like they very well in some cases might own all 26 unit 2-week units. But because their structure is still under the old timeshare unit, they're taxed at a lower rate.
Yeah. So are you, who actually gets the bill, the tax bill?
The management company. So in the case in a town like Cambridge, they send, Wyndham would get the bill, and actually the owners of the was Smugglers Notch Corporation. They've leased to Wyndham to run the place, but the management company gets that, and they collect out of the rental fees, and if the rental fees aren't enough, they charge the owners for the taxes.
And in a case like this, where, in a different setting, we'd call it an apartment building, that does the municipality send a bill for each unit, or does it send it for the whole building at once?
I think you
know?
would be much better to talk to people like Tom Vickery and the Listers Association on how that functionally all works.
Yeah. And
Because
Okay.
that I don't know the details of all of that.
I'm only asked because I'm trying to get the picture, because it does seem, that there's principles here that are, maybe they're following the letter of the law, but the taxation principle seems amiss. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, and I would say too, I think, legitimately timeshares people were selling these 2-week increments for more than the building was worth 25 years ago. And the market has changed.
okay. So we're going to hear from the professional listers on this one. Senator Hardy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but there are obviously big implications for the town itself too, with such an
That's
incredible,
what's generating this.
decrease in the value. So we should maybe hear from the VLCT, or because this would also have a huge tax implication on other property owners in the town, both for school taxes and municipal taxes.
Oh, and I absolutely agree with that. but this has implications for the ed fund.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we should hear from, I don't know, VLCT. I don't know if School Boards Association is tracking this kind of thing, but somebody else besides just the listers and side of it, but also the sort of town school side of it.
And we'll take a look at the impact in the ed fund, because if this is happening in all of our resort towns, and it sounds like you probably can assume it would, because no one's going to resist the tax decrease. If it's $52 million in Cambridge, $52 million is going to hit the ed fund. We've got that, so it's a 3-year average, so it won't hit all at once, but it will hit. And if that's indicative of the kinds of values we're going to see in other places, yeah, $100 million, $200 million is real money. That's going to have a major impact. So I think we do need to look at that.
Well, and I would say my town would have appealed, and it would have gone, and it
And
might
we
not
need to
been so
straighten
bad.
that out.
And I think the tax department can be helpful with that.
We taught what we call property valuation today, but they're in a meeting all day. We have really been trying to get, we haven't done well. We can, we were going to ask Carol Dawes to come in early, but Barry isn't having this problem. So she'd have to find somebody else. At least I don't think we've got a lot of timeshares in Barry. But I'm pretty sure that Sugar Bush could be hit.
Yep.
Stratton, Killington, all of the big resorts probably have some timeshares. Senator Bray.
So we haven't gone through the bill yet, and I'm sorry to say I haven't read it.
Abby's here.
I haven't read it prior to Senator Westman's arrival. So I'll just ask a quick question. Senator Westman, does your bill find a remedy for this?
And if you go to page 2.
Well, let's let Abby walk us through, and she can take us there.
Okay.
It shouldn't take her.
I'm going to send you back to the
Perfect.
BAA.
Bye.
And we'll go to Abby, and she can kind of walk us through the bill. And then I think we'll get Tom Vickery, and we'll get property valuation, and find out what happens if the value of Wyndham Points goes up. I mean, this is a whole new appraisal system. I think we'll find out. So Abby.
Can I ask Senator Westman a quick question?
Sure.
Does this bill address this loss to Cambridge retroactively, or it's just it's all prospective?
No, it would be prospectively.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Abby, walk us through it.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of
Thank
Legislative Counsel. I just wanted to make a couple of points about current law. There was one question from Senator Pearson about the billing. Statute does require towns to list timeshare projects to the management, either association or corporation. And then the individual timeshare owners are responsible for paying it based on their undivided interest in the entire property. So it would be a proportion of the total value of the property that they're paying on. So my understanding is there wouldn't be direct billing to the individual timeshare owners. It would go to the corporation. So that covered a lot of what I was planning on running through with the existing statute. And I've shown pretty much the entire relevant part of the statute in this bill, just to show how current law functions. So a timeshare project is a project involving real property that contains timeshare estates. Timeshare estates are, a timeshare estate is the right to occupy a unit or several units during separated time periods. And it is only for that specific portion of the property. And again, real property is considered to be a single property owned by the management company. Towns have to list in the grand list the property to that management company. And then the individual owners are ultimately responsible. They're liable for the tax payments. As was mentioned, there's no specific direction in statute to how to value timeshares. There is a general rule in the property tax part, so it's several chapters. In one chapter, section 3481, there is a definition of appraisal value, which requires all real property. This is the general rule for valuation. Real property needs to be appraised at its estimated fair market value, which takes into consideration availability of the property, its use, both potential and prospective. So this gets into the highest best use determination. Also, any deficiencies and any other elements such as age or condition that give the property its market value. The sales price of the property is one factor, but it's not determinative. So the way that S14 tries, or it does resolve the issues that Senator Westman just presented, is by requiring timeshare units or projects that have timeshare units in them to be valued in the same way as a comparable property that does not have timeshare units would be valued. It's not restricted to condo ownership. It's any type of ownership that is split into timeshares. It also doesn't address common property, but it just says that, which is not really an issue with the valuation. It just says that if it were a non-timeshare estate property, then it would be valued the same. I think that answers your questions. Many of the other questions are probably more appropriately directed to PVR and the listers to get into the details of valuation and why Stowe was not, or sorry, in that case, it's Cambridge for Smuggler's Notch, but why different towns took a different approach to valuation, because I believe some of them were subtracting the costs of timeshares, and that's why some of them were given lower values than they would have been valued at if they were considered wholly owned.
Okay, so all timeshares have not been valued equally. And I assume property valuation could probably tell us what the court ruling was, because this has gone to court.
These, I believe these were settled. These were settlements, so they did not go
They
all the
didn't
way.
actually go to court. All right. So who settled? The owners
The owners in the town is my
and the
understanding.
town? Okay. Okay. All right. Committee questions for Abby. And it may be this is just the way it is, but we'll take a look at it and listen to everything. Okay. Anybody else you'd like to have in? We've got the town. We'll get the Listers Association and the lister for Cambridge and some of the other towns.
Will we have the tax department on the timing piece?
Yeah, that we'll get them in on that. Yeah. And it may be property valuation. We're getting them in. So that'll be part of what we ask them to talk to us about. I think that's it. And then, yeah, Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, when we proceed, vocabulary is confusing me here. When we talk about these things, how do we define the structure that it contains a whole bunch of apartment-like units? How and who governs the units, the apartment-like units? And does Wyndham get a majority of the 26 units in the 26 apartment-like, of the 26 fortnights that are rented? Or does Wyndham own the overarching structure? Or at least if we could come up with a vocabulary so we knew
Okay.
what we were talking about, that would be helpful.
Okay, and I don't know that it makes any difference. We'll ask property valuation about who's buying these units. I think the question is, how are these units done? And this isn't an apartment building with 26 units generally. It is one unit, and individual people own that unit for 2 weeks of the year. If it were an apartment building, we could deal with it because you've got one owner, and or if it was a condo like we have in Montpelier where there's 6 condo units per building. This is nobody actually, it's a different form of joint ownership.
So
And
you were showing me how confused I can be
No,
unless
it's
we come up with a
confusing.
vocabulary that we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah,
Well,
Thank you.
so we will get there. Senator Sirotkin.
you're muted.
You're muted, Michael. I do this all morning. Michael, you're muted.
I said, can we have Josh Hanford in? I think this issue is more than just about an individual town's grand list. I mean, to the extent these timeshares are paying less taxes than they should, it makes them more prone to be developed and replacing what could be long-term housing. And I think we need to continue that discussion both in my committee and in this committee. So it'd be
Okay.
interesting to see the administration's position on what this is doing to
And,
regular housing.
okay, and Josh Hand is from ACCD.
Yes, he's the director of
Okay,
the housing
so
department.
we'll see if we can get him in next time we take this up. Okay, and if anyone else comes up, Senator Pearson.
Well, I just want to make sure my understanding is correct. It, because it's a little different one I just heard you say, Madam Chair. It effectively is a building that otherwise would look a whole lot like a bunch of condos. But some of the condos in this case are owned under this structure. Right. And I
Right.
mean, I suppose it could be in some cases an individual home, but by and large, I'm picturing townhouses or
Yeah.
a hotel effectively that is a condo, a bunch of condo units, and some of them or all of them or an entire floor or whatever is owned under these timeshare structures.
And the question is, how do you value those? Do you value them as you would the identical structure next door, or do you value them based on a kind of an income?
It seems to me that the direction this should go, I don't want to prejudge it because we haven't heard any testimony yet, but it should be valued at its highest and best use. And if the value based upon income yields a certain valuation that is higher than the owner could get for the house if they sold it as a complete unit, then that should be for that year the valuation. The owner has the right to utilize that property in any way they want, but I think generally for property tax purposes, they look at the highest and best use of the property.
My understanding is they do. I think the problem here is you've got 26 owners.
Well,
Is that 26 properties?
Well-
That's where it's different. It's one property, but you have an owner for every 2 weeks of the year. If you're lucky, I don't know what happens if March and April or November isn't sold. And then there's a management company. And everybody holds insurance on their 2 weeks, or probably pays the management company for 2 weeks, a prorated. Everything is prorated, the taxes, and you pay it to the management company.
Who decides what the management company's fees are
I don't know.
The management company or the Fortnite owners? Or
I don't know.
it would be helpful to know those things.
Yeah.
when
So
we-
I think once Tom Vickery, who does the appraisals and can tell us what and property valuation, will get a better understanding. But I think what Senator Westman said is that these are by and large structures that are built in a resort, and it was part of their mix of ways you could live and ski at that resort. But if it's a way to keep your taxes down, we just might see it spreading out to other buildings. So it's something to keep an eye on. Senator Brock.
I gather that there was not an appeal in this particular case. The town chose not to. And I can assume that if there was an appeal and the town had lost, there would be a catastrophic financial hit on the town at that time. Now, my understanding is that we have a provision in law where, and Abby can perhaps interject and correct me if I'm wrong, that when that happens and there is a substantial loss, there is a fund that we have to make up the difference, but that fund is quite small. And I know I have another instance that I'll be bringing before the committee later on that touches on this very same subject. And is that the identical situation that we might have if there was a loss, Abby?
Yes, that I believe Senator Westman touched on that briefly, that may have been part of the town's decision not to go to an appeal, was to avoid, if it did go to an appeal and there was a greater loss, that then the town would be responsible for paying back to the taxpayer, and that there would be could potentially be very little refund to their next year's tax liability to the state for that reduction in the grand list value. Because as Senator Brock just mentioned, there is a fund, but it only provides up to $100,000 annually for towns that have reductions in their grand list values. And it's also $100,000 across the state for any town that makes a request for help in reduced grand list values. So in this case, it did not go to an appeal because it was settled. That means it is the final decision. There's no longer a final appeal. I think you would need to hear from PBR if there were any way for the town to get any aid from that $100,000 fund.
Okay, so we will find out when they don't have a meeting. I've got the schedule for next week. We're still trying to find folks. Senator Bray.
This is a question for Ms. Shepherd. I know that it's not as simple as calling it this, but it seems like in a way we're talking about valuation based on its role as a business. Like it's rentable at X number of dollars. And if that number goes up or down, now you're going to assess based on that value. So that sounds like sort of an income and productivity measure of the unit, not just a land use or property value of it. Are there other places where we ever blur the lines between pure property value, as Senator Sirotkin was saying, highest and best use, versus the value of that property as it pertains to how much money it can or cannot make?
Current use.
That's an interesting. I think that PVR would be the
Yeah.
best place to answer. I'm not really well versed enough in the different valuation approaches because there are multiple, and sometimes they're used in tandem, both market based, what the property would bring if it were sold, but also income and cost. But there are definitely other properties, particularly very high value commercial properties, very complex properties, utility properties. So yes, there are other instances
We
where
will
this is
talk,
an
but
issue.
that's
Okay.
the issue that current use was set up to address. That if you've got a nice flat farm field in Chittenden County, the rules say you have to, you appraise it at highest and best use, which is usually divided up into housing lots. So in order to protect that, we charge the farmer its value at current use, not at its full value. And, but that's an ongoing, has been an ongoing issue. So we'll talk to PBR, and this is somewhat unique, I think, and we'll just find out where they are. And it sounds like other towns may have been appraising or valuing these kinds of properties differently. I think Senator Westman mentioned Stowe had a different system. So we will find out. And we were ahead, now we're behind. And we're going to go on to the next bill. I'm trying to get through as many of the smaller bills as we have, so that, we can get an idea of what we've got to deal with by crossover. So this is S-261. It's an act relating to municipal retention of property tax collections. And Senator Parent is with us to tell us, why he feels this is a good bill. And then we've got Abby to walk us through it, and Carol Dawes, who is the head of the Town Clerk and Treasurers Association and the Town Clerk and Treasurer in Barry. So Abby.
Great, thank you, Madam
No,
Chair.
it's not Abby, it's
You-
Corey. I
okay.
saw Carol Dawes pop up and I got distracted. Okay.
So I'll start by saying in my day job, about 14 months ago, I transitioned to a director of operations role for the town of St. Albans. And I can tell you there's very few things as humbling as having to work in an environment in which you wrote legislation or were part of legislation that you have to carry out on a daily basis. And this bill actually came to my mind in about August of last summer, when I was handling with the I guess blessing in the sense that property values are increasing up here in Franklin County. With the CLA, we got a 12-cent tax hit in the town of St. Albans, and I was getting phone calls through the roof, and it was all school tax, working for the town, and probably spending half a day for a number of weeks just answering phone calls and explaining to people what was going on. And I walked downstairs to our town clerk's office, Anna, and I go, God, what's the school paying us to do all this work for them? We have to handle the complaints. We have to mail the bills. We have to hold the election for them. We do vote by mail for town meeting day. So we mail the ballots. Last year, the state helped pay for it, but this year we're paying for it. So what do we get for this? I know the state keeps 1/3 of our local option tax revenue. She goes, nothing. I go, what do you mean nothing? We do a lot of work for the school district and get paid nothing for it. And so started just doing a little bit of research, and Abby was able to help me that, we are a receiving town, which is nice, but also towns that are sending towns get to keep 0.225%. So less than 1/4% of what they collect, which I think at our town would be about $30,000. I think at the city of St. Albans, it'd be about $18,000 if this was to apply to theirs. To just offset the cost of collecting this fee or the taxes for the school district. The town clerk's office, 80% of property taxes in the town of St. Albans go to the school district. Only 20% is for the local municipality. And so, 30 cents is about 1/3 of a penny on our tax rate. And so my thought is, the state of Vermont isn't going to give us 100% of the local option tax. They take their piece to manage it. We always take our piece. And, I find it would only be, I think, fair to allow municipalities who have this expense to be able to at least offset that expense for the work they do on behalf of the school districts.
Okay, questions for Senator Parent? Senator McDonald?
The we pay, each town gets a stipend per parcel to help them administer and appraise and collect, and the taxes of each parcel. Is that stipend not available for the purposes that the
We
It
already
says in
allow
the
sending
parent-
towns, we already allow sending towns to get paid this fee, Senator McDonald. You know, we treat towns differently on that front. So my point is allow towns to be treated equally. And two, you do help pay for the, the appraisal and all that, but you don't pay my salary, or you don't pay other folks in town manager salaries who end up taking these phone calls and complaints. I mean, if you didn't want to pay us, I'd also be happy if we just made the school districts send their own tax bill. I think that would generate a conversation as well too. People saw two different bills.
I was asking about the mechanics, Madam Chair, and whether that money was available to be used for the purpose that the senator has outlined, or whether we might simply increase that stipend and authorize it for, that might be an avenue to tackle this. That was my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Abby, why don't you, okay, Senator Hardy has a question.
Yeah, I just have a clarification question for Senator Parent. I think I know what you mean, but I want to just make sure I understand with the sending and receiving towns. Are you talking about the tuitioning and receiving tuition and sending tuition? So
Yeah.
your town, other school districts tuition into your town, and
No.
right, they send kids
Well,
into your town.
Into our school districts, no. So like the town of St. Albans, city of St. Albans, Fairfield makes Maple Run School District. Each one of those municipalities collects their portion, but we're a school district that I think pulls in resources from the ed fund. If you collected all of our grand list and what we pay in, we get money in for now. I think in the next 2 decades, looking at our growth, we're up from 5,000 to 7,000 people in real estate values. We're going to be, unfortunately, maybe Chittenden County North. But we're seeing that growth. So we might end up being a sending town someday, but it's
I
just,
see.
so
Okay,
that
so
piece.
I'm glad I clarified, because that's not what I
That's the original language.
yes, that's
it
the old
replaced-
fashioned language.
Yes,
We don't
Not
say that
cool.
anymore, Senator Parent. So what you do have your school district, though, that you're a part of, has multiple towns, not just St. Albans as
Correct.
part of that school district. So what you would be proposing in this bill, all of those, all of those underlying towns in the school district would keep this percentage
Yeah,
of the
so-
taxes in order to pay for their
Help offset the cost of mailing tax bills. And the other piece I didn't mention, but so late tax payments, we have to pay the school district when the money's due, or the state, whoever gets paid. And even if tax payments are late, so we're floating, and I think the city of St. Albans about the same, about $250,000 to $300,000 throughout the year in tax dollars. Now we get to charge an interest rate on that, but if they don't, then we got to go through a tax sale, and it may be a while before we collect that money. We're effectively giving an interest-free loan to the school districts if tax payments haven't come in when they're due from us.
I think in some cases, local towns and school districts create local agreements for these kinds of things. Have you reached out to your school district about that?
Yeah, there used to be a local agreement, and it hasn't been in place for about 8 or 9 years. And that, I think it'd be easier if it was just every town was treated the same across the state. Personally, it takes out the negotiating piece of that.
okay. The big question is, how much will it cost?
Yeah.
Because every town will be also paying to make up that lost revenue. So Senator Pearson,
Every town sends out a municipal tax bill, and every town, even if they're a tuitioning town, sends out a school tax bill, usually the same. So help me understand why you say we don't treat each town the same.
Because we don't get paid. So we do the bill. Think of us as the billing department for a school district, and we get paid nothing for it. Towns who spend more money to the state than their school district costs get to keep this. towns who get money in.
Say
So
that,
it's-
say that again, because you're talking about a mechanical process that happens in every town.
Yes,
And no matter your school budget, every town deals with some level of this infrastructure.
right. And we allow some towns to keep them on this less than 0.25%, this 0.225%, and other towns aren't allowed to do that.
This goes back to the old, some towns send more money into the ed fund than they get back. Some towns get back money. And I think is part, and I'm looking at Senator McDonald, the original Act 60 or thereabouts, part of the agreement to make everyone see this as fair. The agreement was that the towns that sent all their money to the state could keep X portion of it. Every town gets paid a per parcel fee to send out the bills on the part of the state. And we've done a lot of work over the years. There's one bill. Yeah, and last
And appraised, Madam Chair.
and appraised, yes, they all
Also
have to
used
be
for
appraised.
appraisals.
But there's one bill and there's one stamp and there's one envelope. And so it's in theory not additional work. The town is going to put it in. Last year we said you could separate out school and town tax bills. We've done more things playing with the tax bills than their layout than I think anything else. But it's all in one bill, is in my experience.
Yeah, and it's all
Okay.
paid with one check. People don't cut a different check. It's
Right,
It all
yeah.
comes into us.
Write it down and, yeah, but the town is liable to pay the school their fully approved budgeted amount. And if the money doesn't come in, the town is left floating that amount of money and is liable to, well, the town is liable to collect all the money. Yep.
And so like
Okay.
if a house is reappraised and it's, say, actually my house, for example, was appraised $100,000 more than what it should have been a couple of years ago. So that tax, cut I got on my own, I think it was $1,700. The town ate that full amount. The school district doesn't eat any of that for that year
Right.
until the next year's set. So there's,
This is big, but most of this predates. I mean, the towns have always sent out the tax bills. This
Yeah.
didn't change with Act 60. But, there's arguments. We're now doing mail out ballots. So Senator Hardy. Wait, I did see Senator
Senator Sorokin.
Sorokin.
How
Senator
much?
Sorokin, you're fading into your
Oh, really?
ice skating.
I don't see myself. Okay.
Yeah, you're fading
no,
and
no,
Senator McDonald is half buried in a snowbank.
I had my hand up for a while, so my question
Yes,
is not as timely as it would have been, but I wanted to make sure I heard Senator Perrin correctly. He said something to the effect that his community was turning into Chittenden County North. God forbid. Is that right? Did I hear that? right?
yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of growth up our way.
okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment and then a question for Abby. I see is in Title 16, which is the education statutes, and the House Education Committee is doing a complete rewrite right now, working on this Title 16 education statutes, in part because this concept of the town school and all of the sort of structures of school districts has changed pretty significantly, especially after Act 46. So there are far, far fewer town school districts than there used to be. This is true for my town and many, many other towns. So I would just caution that this is based on really old town school structures, the way it's drafted right now, that may be being updated.
Okay.
And I don't think it works the way that Senator Parent is describing it, with all due respect to Senator Parent, in terms of the sending and receiving towns and some getting to keep things or not. But I mean, Abby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't understand that to be the case. So I'm just confused by that.
Madam Chair, should I do the walkthrough and sort of the setup for some of these questions? Is that the right time? Oh,
Okay, that would be good.
okay. So I may have used the language sending and receiving because that's sort of how I learned the structure. But there are almost no sending towns currently, my understanding. The Department of Taxes website mentions that there are almost no towns that fall into that pure sending category. Those would be the towns that would pay directly to the Ed Fund, to the state treasurer. And those towns are currently allowed a 0.225% retention of education tax collected. As was mentioned, there are two other fees, which this bill doesn't address, but there are two other per parcel fees annually paid to towns. One is a $1 fee, $1 per parcel fee, and the other is an $8.50 fee. Those are restricted to reappraisal costs and maintaining the grand list, and then for equalization for the $1 fee. So those are separate. Those are not addressed under this bill. For the sort of quote unquote sending towns, there is statutory language that allows the 0.225% retention. It's actually in, it is in Title 32, whereas as Senator Hardy noticed, the bill language relates to the quote unquote receiving towns that's in Title 16. So there's both this retention allowance. There is also a late penalty of 8%. This came up, it was under a lot of discussion in the beginning of the pandemic. Yes. Because if towns were going to be late making their payments to the Ed Fund, there would have been this 8% penalty, which was quite hefty. So most towns do borrowing to avoid that penalty. There is also if a payment is 90 days or more overdue, then state aid can be withheld from those towns. So there are some pretty hefty, there's both this 0.225% retention allowance, and then there's also pretty heavy penalties. In Title 16, the language that may be amended in a different bill, in which case the different provisions in the different bills, if this bill were to move, would need to be harmonized. But this just acts as though, statute is what it is and is adding in this new allowance. This is for towns that are paying directly to the school district. There is no allowance allowed. There is a general allowance allowed for late or rescinded or any change to homestead declarations. It's a similar amount. It's 0.225%. But this goes directly into the, when the town treasurer is paying the school district, it allows the same amount, 0.225%, to be retained from all tax collections. And it also adds in the same penalty provisions of 8% if the payment is late. And then if there's a more than 90-day late payment, then state aid can be withheld from the town.
Okay. So we will take a look at this. I suppose if we've got a vehicle coming over for a rewrite of the whole section, we can always attach this to that if we decide it's a good thing to do, or if we get it out of here, it will get to the House and they can include it in their deliberations. Senator Pearson.
I wonder if I could ask Abby to help me understand, because Senator Parent's saying there's two different kinds of towns that get treated differently. And you've said that there's no such thing as a sending town anymore. And so what's the distinction here that Senator Parent would have us equalize in your understanding?
So in my understanding, that means that most towns are not able to avail themselves of the 0.225% under current law, because almost none of them would qualify. I don't know how many. The Agency of Education or the tax department would probably have that information. So this would be expanding the allowance to more towns.
But not all towns?
No.
Or
Yes,
to-
so then it would cover all towns. As
and-
opposed to
but-
currently
But you're
only.
not sure it covers any towns currently.
The current statute that allows the 0.225% may not apply to any towns. I don't know if that changes yearly, because those are the towns that are paying directly to the ed fund. So
Okay.
this would expand that to every town.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Yes, you're welcome.
so questions at this point? And we will get property valuation to come in and talk to us. I think it might help on this one if they could bring us a chart as to, because there were a lot of negotiations as part of Act 60 between the town and whether or not the state should be doing it, and, you know, and sending out our own property tax bills. And, you know, there were things that were given. It was a negotiation. And some of those things, it looks like, are kind of falling by the wayside. So if nobody's ascending town, that's interesting. We ought to find out what's happening. So we'll ask property valuation to talk to us. Carol Dawes is here from the Clerks Association. So Carol, give us the clerk's point of view, or treasurer. I'm not sure.
I've got both hats with me, so
Okay,
whatever works. Carol Dawes, I'm the Berry City Clerk and Treasurer and Chair of the Legislative Committee for the Clerk and Treasurers Association. First of all, I shared this draft bill with a number of my peers, and there definitely are sending towns. I heard from a few who said they do currently take advantage of this opportunity that they have. They do retain the small percentage when they make their payments into the state ed fund. So there definitely are sending towns. It will be interesting to hear from the tax department or from PVR as to what the percentages are. When I read the bill, I had a similar response to Senator Parents, in that I felt like it was it was sort of leveling the playing field and creating equity across the different communities. One of the things, obviously, it's kind of a carrot and stick thing, which creates some accountability. Not only do communities have an opportunity to keep the small percentage for timely payment of education taxes to their schools, they also have to do it by the deadline, or there is a penalty. So it does have an accountability piece, which I think is interesting and valid. It does mean about $18,000 to the city of Berry, and that's about a third of a penny on our tax rate, which, every little bit helps. Let's see what else I took some notes. There's been talk about the float, and Berry City actually carries something in the neighborhood of $400,000 of delinquent taxes on a regular basis. Now, obviously, some of that is municipal and some of it is education, but it's a fairly good chunk that we're carrying. And as you know, we need to make the school whole by the end of the year, so they get all their money by June 30. The only real question I have, and this would be a question for Department of Taxes or PVR, is how this retention of fee would be calculated and allowed for in the reconciliation of the true up at the end of the year for property taxes, for education taxes. I'm sure it would just be another line in the formula, but that's the only question I would have about it.
okay. Committee, any question? I am not seeing any. Okay, Carol, thank you. I'm
Thank you for
assuming
inviting me.
Barry doesn't have any timeshares and you aren't losing $52 million. So I'm not going to ask you to
I-
chime in on that one.
I wish I was and that somebody could help me find it.
Okay. Yeah, Cambridge may well be a sending town who is going to be turning into a receiving town with that kind of a loss in the grand list. All right, committee, we are ahead of time. But I think, have we got other questions at this point? We will get property valuation in on this, and I'll ask joint fiscal. I mean, the other alternative is we can just not give anybody this fee. But I'll ask joint fiscal about the hit on the ed fund, because my thinking is it could be fairly significant if it goes to every town, and right now it's going to very few towns. Of course, they are probably sending in a lot of money, but we will check that out with joint fiscal, and we'll check it out with property valuation, and we will, I believe we've got this back on the agenda next week. So I think we'll see if we can get Senator Rahm to come in and maybe come back around 3:10. You're going to get a nice break. And I will see you then. So Faith, that we can be off and in recess.
Ending live stream.